right, welcome to the Mental Health Toolbox. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you're watching from Instagram, please do note there's about a 20-second-ish delay. So if you have any questions over there, I am keeping an eye on that. It's a little bit funky sometimes, so I'll be sure to join over there. Hey, I see you joined Katrina on Instagram, so it's nice to see it's working.
Yep.
So we'll be talking about Donna's Law today, and sadly, gun violence is a real major public health concern, especially here in the United States. And we're going to be talking about Donna's Law, which is an initiative to help reduce gun suicides. And we're going to talk all about that and the wonderful work Katrina has been doing about that and why it's so personal, why it's such a personal mission for her. Before we jump into that, just want to put it out there. Trigger warning, we are talking about some rather sensitive content today around suicide and gun violence. So if this is a triggering topic for you, or if you have little ears around you, you may want to save this one for later and bookmark it. Okay, if you feel so inclined, please do share the stream or replay with anyone that you feel would benefit from this wonderful, important, difficult topic. Okay, but without further ado, let's meet Katrina. Katrina, thank you so much for joining us today on the Mental Health Toolbox podcast.
Hi.
Really appreciate the work you're doing and
Thank
would
you.
love to find out how we can help in this mission. All right. All good? Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Excellent. So maybe you could share a little bit about what brought you into this space and educate myself and our listeners on Donna's Law. What is it and why should we care?
Sure. I'll tell you what it is, and then I'll tell you how I got there.
Sure.
Donna's Law is a law in 3 states, and it's also an active bill in many states currently. And it has been to Congress before. And what it would enable people to do is to voluntarily opt out of their ability to purchase a gun. So, as I'm sure most of your listeners are aware, the vast majority of gun violence is suicide. About 2/3 of gun deaths are suicides. And in some states, it's even 90% is the highest that I've seen of what represents suicide in that. And then when we look at the other 1/3 or 10% or what's left that isn't suicide, it's often suicide connected. We hear in the news often of someone dying by self-inflicted gunshot wound, which is also suicide. And so Donna's Law can help people who have impulsive episodic psychosis, or let's say family history, or other factors that could make them feel uncomfortable without having any barriers to purchase a gun. For example, where I live in New Orleans, I can just walk into a store and buy a gun. You can come over and we can sit in the kitchen and I can give you a gun, and then that's your gun. And then you don't need any permits or a license or anything. So in a place like Louisiana, where we don't have any waiting periods, which is also the same scenario for most of the country, it enables us to give people a tool to protect themselves from the most common method of suicide. It's also the most lethal method. It has almost no intervention time. It has the highest lethality. So most people do not survive a gunshot. When you talk to suicide survivors, most of them are not gunshot. Most of them are by methods that about have like a 4% success rate and also have a huge intervention time. For example, something like jumping off a bridge, that's going to take someone some planning and some time, and there might be people around. So something like that is going to have a lot of different spaces for intervention. Whereas a firearm, whether that firearm is at in your home or right next to you, or whether that firearm is easily accessible at a nearby store, that increases people's chances of dying by suicide drastically. So Donna's Law does not interfere with the Second Amendment. It's not gun control, it's self-control, and it is reversible. So it enables people who, let's say, have bipolar or are having a reaction because of substance abuse or down dosing from a drug or something like that. or lots of other factors. The stock market could crash, or lots of things can happen that can make people think about suicide. So for people that think about suicide or think about using guns in violence, and have episodes where those feelings are stronger and have times when they are self-advocating for their own care, Donna's Law is a perfect tool for these people to protect themselves from impulsive gun suicide. Yeah, and
Wow, that's a
this is how I
yeah,
lost my mom.
like we
My
said,
mom
yeah, the deep topic.
Donna, and
Yeah.
our family didn't have guns. My mom was under psychiatric care. She was down dosing from an antidepressant that increased suicidality, impulsivity, psychosis, and a lot of physical pain, tremors, insomnia. And in that time period when she was dealing with that, which we were all very aware of, and she was fully cared for. She had been in inpatient care voluntarily 3 times. We were trying to get her back into care, but you can't live in those care facilities. And she was in near, like, pretty much daily contact with her psychiatrist. Her partner had quit his job in order to stay home and take care of her. The day that she left to go buy the gun, our family called the police 5 times, but there was nothing they could do to stop that sale. And that morning, my mom got on her phone and she searched the words, how to hang yourself. And Google provided her with the results. And the results were the first article that she read, which I could see because I got her phone later,
Mm.
was an article that included a chart of what the most successful routes to suicide would be. It talked about all the methods. It talked about the success rates, the risks, the percentages, how much pain, how many minutes, all these things were laid out. And the article recommended that my mom use a handgun. And then my mom Googled handguns New Orleans and was immediately directed to a store near her that sold her a gun, despite her having been in recent psychiatric wards, despite her having extreme tremors and being in very obvious psychosis. There was really nothing the gun store could do to stop that sale either. So there was a lot of points where we thought we could have an intervention on this, but truly with no barriers to firearms and the most lethal means and the way that most people commit suicide in America, we were destined to lose. And so after I lost my mom, and she died in a very public place, she shot herself at the park. And I am a very public person in New Orleans, and I'm an artist and parade producer in Mardi Gras as my occupation. And I felt that sharing her story could help other families protect themselves from this, and was able to get a bill into the Louisiana legislature about 6 months after she died, and that did not pass. And then I have since been working with Professor Fred Vars at the University of Alabama, and he's the original conceiver of this, and was also suffers from bipolar, and was looking for a way to protect himself and others without interfering with the Second Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the tool we've come up with, and we're really proud of it. And it's been implemented in Washington State and Virginia and Utah, which are not easy states to make gun laws. So I'm very proud of us on that. And it has action going on in about a dozen states right now, all over the country. Legislators are finding it. They're reaching out to us. We're finding, like, almost every day now I Google Donna's Law and voluntary do not sell for firearms, and I find like another senator that's about to sponsor it and things like that. So it's gotten a lot of momentum. And I think that part of it is because it's such an important time for this legislation to be moving forward and for people to have access to this tool.
Certainly. I mean, unfortunately, there's no time like the present with all of the horrible things we're seeing with shootings and school shootings and the rates of suicide, especially since the pandemic. It's very sad. But here, you've taken something, a tragedy, and you have turned it into a way to help others. right? When we
Yeah,
talk
I
about
like.
loss, right? We talk about loss. We talk about creating meaning out of loss as a
Mhm.
healthiest way to cope. And you've taken that to the nth degree. You've
Yeah.
gone to the you pick up a fight, with the
Uh-huh.
legal system
Well, I
and
knew
the
a
way that
lot of
we,
other vice paths that I could
yeah,
have gone through, and I had seen a lot of my friends lose their parents to, devastating causes, and, there were a lot of patterns that I was really aware of seeing with my friends, like, substance abuse, promiscuity, abusing yourself financially, irresponsibility, different things, that made that experience have much worse impacts on their life than it needed to. And when my mom died, I just knew that I had to throw myself into something that wasn't going to be self-destructive. And just when I feel upset about it, reach out through email to whoever I can to just like spread the word rather than self-harm, I guess.
yes, absolutely. So definitely a healthy reframe, right? And unfortunately, like you said, you learned your mother's
Hmm.
state of mind by going through her Google and kind of figuring out, okay, so how exactly did this play out? What was her mindset? And yeah, the fact that somebody could just go out and impulsively, you know,
Hmm.
get what they want without having any kind of a buffer,
Hmm.
that's concerning, right?
Yeah, it is. It's really dangerous. And also, when you have a state like Louisiana, where we don't have barriers to purchase guns, you also don't have a lot of barriers to inherit guns.
Hmm.
So a lot of guns are passed through inheritance. And I actually have my mom's gun. So to be able to discuss it with people,
Hmm.
because I think it's really important that people understand that, like, that could happen. Like, somebody's mother could shoot themselves and then they could be receiving a gun even though they have zero training on guns. So the whole like passage of the way guns are flowing to people, there should be some way for people to be able to protect themselves from that.
Absolutely. So that being said, I'm sure this was no small feat. You already mentioned the three states in which you've had this law passed, or some probably more difficult ones, I imagine. What does that process look like? I mean, when you take on an order like this, right? A challenge.
Mhm.
Did you have any idea what that would look like, or how did you go about the process in advocating for a law like this?
I kind of just threw myself in, and the first step was that I was honest about what had happened to our family, and I very quickly just told everyone my mom shot herself at the park, because I felt like it was going to come out anyway, and it might as well have come from me. And I wanted people. I knew it was going to be really hard for people to share their condolences with me and like be around me after this happened. So I wanted them, just to know that like they could use these words with me, and that I was like open to the conversation about it. And I posted it on Facebook that my mom had bought this gun even though she had been in voluntary psychiatric care, and that I couldn't believe that she was able to buy this gun so fast, and this is happening to families that don't have guns, and how could this happen to us? And I was really raw with emotion. My mom had just died, and then a lot of people reached out to me. And one of the people that reached out to me was a woman named Victoria Coy. And I have a dance troupe in Mardi Gras. My dance troupe is
Hmm.
called the Bearded Oysters.
Love it.
And it's a very famous adult dance troupe here in New Orleans. And luckily, it is an amazing network of women in some very cool professions. And
Mm.
Victoria had just um, gotten the job as the director of firearm prevention, like death prevention at
Mhm.
Amnesty International, something like that. And she was expressing her condolences to me. And I said, like, how could this have happened? Like, was the gun store really allowed to sell her this gun? And she really laid out the gun laws for me. And right then, just over the phone, I said, I just don't want this happening to other people. Like, this has to change. Like, the answer isn't that, oh yeah, this is how it is, and
Mhm.
sorry that happened to your mother. That it's not just going to continue. And suicide is very generational, and my mom's
Right.
not the first person in her generation or the generation above to kill themselves. So for my family and for other families like my family, it's very important that we have tools that we can see matter. And a tool like this obviously isn't going to be created by, let's say, like the pharmaceutical industry or the medical academies. This is a very different tool. And so once Victoria told me this concept of creating this voluntary do not sell that wouldn't interfere with the Second Amendment, because it's very heated here in Louisiana about the Second Amendment, and people are extremely protective of it in every way. And so Donna's Law was a way that we could start the conversation and give people a tool without, well, so we thought, but we ended up losing. So we were wrong about that. But our hope was that we could find bipartisan compassion on that, which we
Sure.
have found other places. And as I moved forward, maybe a week later, I received a beautiful phone call from this policewoman who was a social worker. And she told me, just keep talking. This is happening all the time. The police are because the police have to go deal with these things too. Like there were probably 5 police officers that went and like saw what happened to my mother. And then
Yeah.
there's the coroner's office, and there's all these people in your city that are dealing with this silently. And so to hear from my government essentially to please keep talking and to please help that industry to prevent it through this legislation, and that even though the local government can't stand up for this legislation, that she was saying that she really did support it and she thought that this could make a big difference. I think, and then it's just been about talking and just keep talking and keep saying it and keep telling the story. And I hate, I hate that this is true, but I feel like I have to be really likable, that, and my mom has to be likable, and just play nice. And the concept of like strange bedfellows and really reaching across the aisle and showing compassion to people who don't want this legislation to pass first, and expressing my understanding for like their fears and things like that, and then hoping that by me showing compassion first, that they too will show compassion about it. I'd say that the value of compassion has reached its limit in my efforts, and there is a huge resistance from the NRA right now, which is so sad and breaks my heart. And I hope that they can understand that this legislation is going to save lives and doesn't interfere with the Second Amendment. It only protects people. It only makes gun owners look more responsible. It's the right thing to do, and it will save lives. So I hope that can change. I have this like fairy tale where the NRA and I live like happily ever after, and we work together on this one day,
Sure.
maybe.
Ideally, yeah, absolutely. And I know it's different in every state. I'm not as familiar with other states, but here in California, right, when somebody's placed on a 5150 or a psychiatric hold, they're not allowed to own or possess firearms for 3 years, right? Now,
Yeah.
whether or not that, I don't think there's any check. I don't know if there's a system that goes out to the gun shops.
So I assume that's an involuntary, right?
Yes, involuntary.
Okay, so across the country, involuntary will, for some period of time, have, okay, so with state, let's say like licensed gun dealers, they're working with a background check system. So that would be like more like a store that someone buys a gun at. So in a place like Louisiana, there are some other ways someone could get a gun, that aren't a store. But for the most part, the store is a point that there can be intervention. So the way that it works is that, so if someone is voluntarily committed, they don't lose their rights to purchase a gun, which also means they don't receive that tool that we've all agreed is helpful. They don't have the ability to get that tool, even if they can comprehend that it would help them. And so this enables them to at least have the equal benefits of the psychiatric tools and self-defense against suicide that someone who's essentially been criminalized has. And that part of it is really important, because when we think about people going to psychiatric lockup, we assume they can't get their guns. That's what I assumed about my mother. I didn't think at all that she would ever go to a store and buy a gun. That seemed like, when I heard that, it was like if someone told me my mom bought a rocket ship and left the planet. It was so far-fetched. It was like, oh, your mother, like, I mean, just imagine like if you just heard your mother shot herself at the park. Like, it's so there was nothing that made sense about that. There was until I started looking at the laws and the statistics and realizing that this isn't this weird anomaly that happened to my mom. This was actually this equation that was building, that was essentially destined to happen because of such easy access to guns and really no education from her psychiatrist to our family about the easy access. Google being a point that could have helped out a bit, not being helpful at all in that moment, and literally directing her to the gun store without any intervention. I've also heard from people who did Google gun stores in their place in thinking that they were going to go buy a gun to kill themselves, and then chose not to. And then Google continues to show them the ads for weeks about gun stores and the guns. So there's a lot more that I'm interested in changing that I think will have huge impact.
It's a deep rabbit hole, isn't it?
And I, some of it is legislation, some of it is policy change, some of it is, I guess, like a lot of the myths around suicide too, I think are prevention. Sometimes I wonder, does our country even really believe in suicide prevention, or do we just pretend we do? Because because the messaging about what suicide prevention is almost never about firearms, which, if we look at like what we see about suicide prevention, or like, is most of what I see is like imagery of like a person surrounded by like a heart of community, like something like that, you know?
There's a hotline, right? The suicide hotline. I know
there's a suicide hotline.
988.
And I mean, it would have been nice if Google showed that to my mom in that moment. Or really like Google has a lot of analytics they could be looking at. And there are certain factors like my mother was a woman, that she clearly didn't know where the local gun store was. So she was probably a first-time buyer. Things like that. They could have known that she wasn't a normal gun owner with a lot of knowledge, and that would have been a great time for them to make some interventions, even by providing her different information rather than encouraging her to shoot herself. And like, I'm gonna bring up Google again because I hope they hear me. Another thing too is like when we think about women and suicide and guns, there's this myth that women don't use guns, that men use guns, and that men mean it, and women don't mean it. And if women meant it, they'd do it.
Men are more likely to accomplish suicide. Right.
Yeah, but the truth is that most gun deaths for women, I mean, most suicides for women are by gun, and women have Google, and they're going to be Googling the same thing that my mom Googled, and they're going to find that all these other rates have almost no chance of success, and that the most successful option is going to be to go buy a handgun, and then they're going to be introduced to that product, and then they're going to be brought to like a retail location where they can purchase it. And then also, when someone is in a sales experience, they're with a salesman, and so that person is training them on the product. And so, for example, this salesman encouraged my mom to buy some pink rose gold bullets that raised money for breast cancer. And I mean, that doesn't sound like my mom at all. And so I can see that there was education being placed into that also, that there was so much that she really didn't have a chance. We didn't have a chance. The police didn't have a chance to stop that at all. And it's sad that the only option for someone like my mother would be to just lock her up all the time rather than being able to lock up the guns, or at
Mhm.
least lock up her access to the guns, or enable a gun dealer to realize that she's not someone that he should sell to. I'm sure that the person who sold my mom the gun has heard about it. And I've even reached out to them like several times in a pretty friendly but very passive aggressive way, inviting
Mhm.
them to events.
Mhm.
Because the gun dealers, I don't think want this happening. And from what I've heard from the police, that gun shop was lucky that my mom left the parking lot to kill herself, because a lot of people are just killing themselves in the parking lots. Um, People are also killing themselves inside firing ranges, like just going in and renting a gun and killing themselves. And most, like, there's this myth in society that people who kill themselves want to die. And this is so far from the truth. Nobody wants to die. None of these people want to die. They're actually either in psychosis or they're in incredible, unbearable pain, either emotionally or physically, or from what I found, like typically both. It seems like physical pain is really, um, I guess, like undervalued in the equation of what creates suicide. But a lot of people have really heavy like neck and back injuries and are living in um, despair and pain because of that. And so people are looking to this option to end pain. And another myth I'd like to bust is that they'll just find another method. And like I
Mhm.
said about, the information that Google provided, and yeah, there are other methods. My mother could have accomplished it another way, but she didn't, because statistically, those methods would have failed and my mom would probably still be alive. And had she been intervened with at that point, she had a 90% chance of never dying by suicide at any point. So, episodic psychosis and episodic pain and things like that. I mean, they can affect us all. Nobody really knows their future, and whether or not someone has bipolar or episodic psychosis, Donna's Law can also be a tool for them. If they feel that they need a waiting period or they want to exist in a society that has waiting periods on guns, they can use this tool as well. And there's a lot of examples of this type of barrier that we're allowed to create in our lives. Like, for example, there's one for compulsive gambling addiction where people can voluntarily opt out of their ability to go into casinos. And
Mhm.
that's been very successful. And that is also very connected to episodic psychosis, because a lot of
Sure.
people
Yeah.
with, let's say, like bipolar disorder,
Mhm.
can self-harm in a casino very easily and be encouraged to do so. And
Yeah.
nonstop, always there. And for people who live in a community where there's a casino right there, that is a great tool for them. We also see things like advanced directives about what do we want our healthcare to be in the future.
Mhm.
We see medications people can take so that they can interact with their substance that they have addictions issues with, like whether
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
alcohol or opioids or things like that. So this type of model of making a good decision when you're in a good place for a time when you're concerned that you might choose something in your impulsivity that could be highly damaging, is something that in society we've had for a long time. And Fred, the law professor, he loves talking about Homer and the Odyssey, and
Mhm.
about how Ulysses ties himself to the mast of the ship to be able to sail through, I think, the sirens. And so that's an example where we can see that the human mind is capable of knowing that there will be times where we won't
Mhm.
be in our right mind.
Sure.
So I feel that Donna's Law should be the first line of defense for people who are experiencing anything that could lead into suicidality.
Well,
It's
sure. That's why we talk
free.
about safety plans, right? In treatment, we
Yeah,
talk about
it's
safety
free.
plans
There's
because
no side effects.
Right.
Um, yeah, you can do it without your doctor or,
Hmm.
with your doctor, depending on the state. Um, yeah, I should talk about that too, about signups. So the three states enable you to sign yourself up. You're not coerced. You're not being signed up by a doctor. You're not being signed up by a judge. You're doing it on your own accord. And so some states have various entry points into that system. And what you're doing when you sign up is you are entering yourself into the NICS background check system through your state police. And that system will then notify licensed gun dealers if you try and purchase that you are not allowed to purchase a gun. And it won't tell them why, it will just be denied. And there could be many, many reasons it's denied. It's totally confidential. Let's say
Hmm.
you're in a small town with a gun store. There's no way that the gun store owner can find out anything more than denied about you. And then because it's reversible, if if at some point someone feels that they no longer want this, it's pretty quick to get off. Depending on the state, it's a couple weeks. And then
Hmm.
to get on, it varies by state, but some states enable you to sign up by mailing in a form that you fill out and print from online, or going to the county clerk or through your doctor. If you go on donnaslaw.com, there's a tab about registering for yourself, and people can get links there. Thank you.
Hmm. This is the tree. Yes.
Yeah, this is actually a picture from my mom's funeral, and this is where my mom's ashes were scattered. And
Hmm.
she shot herself not far from that tree behind it. And it was a very special place for her and our family, and also our city. It's called the Tree of Life, and it is kind of the cathedral of the Bohemian community, and a place where people have weddings and funerals
Mm.
and dates, and it's a real community central place for us in New Orleans.
Yeah. It's I think it's wonderful that you're commemorating her like this, and her memory, and you're turning what would be kind of a tragic place, right? Triggering place into a place of meaning and purpose,
Yeah.
right? For the
Yeah,
community.
one of the things that I do in my life outside of this is I teach a workshop called Put the Fun in Funeral Planning. And funerals are very extravagant in New Orleans, and there's a huge funeral culture. And in teaching people about end of life ideas and what kind of funeral they want, what I found is that really the most important thing for society is that we leave legacy, positive
Hmm.
legacy. And what legacy means is what happens that benefits society after we die. And that can happen in all kinds of ways. That could be a donation to a library, or inheritance, or um, creating a scholarship for a baseball player, or whatever is your passion in life. And I feel that through Donna's Law, I've been able to create this amazing legacy for my mom, and for myself, and for my family, that I hope to create that model for other people, that instead of just thinking about the funeral, think about how this person's life can truly change their society upon their death. And I think a lot about my mom kind of being an organ donor for suicide
Hmm.
prevention, that her story is what is giving life to this legislation now. And there are everybody has stories. Everyone's had some traumas, and our stories are so important to pair with the work that legislators and um, people who write legalese and all
Yeah.
that, because that's what takes the story into reality for,
Hmm.
like, let's say a committee that is deciding whether to pass this legislation or not. And so that's true with Donna's Law, but it's true for everything, and any cause that people really feel passionate about and have a story that they feel would help persuade a committee. I highly recommend that they start providing testimony when they see legislations that they care about come up. And it's really not that hard anymore. Since the pandemic, now most committee hearings around the country have gone with a Zoom option. And so I'm able to testify on bills in, across the country without even being there, which I
Fantastic.
wouldn't be able to do
Yeah.
5 years ago.
No.
So right now is like, I mean, you can sit at home in your underwear and you can make a
And
difference.
advocate. Yeah. And lobby. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
pretty incredible. Yeah.
And
Oh,
it's fun too. Like I think
yeah.
that I think of it as a sport and as an art project, and I don't really take it too personally when we lose or when things don't go my way on it. Mostly because we're so diversified that even if one committee in some state says no, there's another committee that's looking at it tomorrow. So there's always more going on, and I think that that really helps. From being disappointed, and I've also like when you go through something in your life like this. It's really hard to be around people who don't understand it. And
Hmm.
my whole world was the Mardi Gras industry and parades and clowns and,
Hmm.
puppets and costumes and just like playfulness. And my job is to give people joy and to create these
Hmm.
super over the top joyous rituals for people. And it was a very weird emotional space to, be dealing with so much trauma and depression and grief and all these things, and yet feel like, okay, well, I definitely can't talk to these people about it because, it's like against my occupation. And then to find people in this work that have also experience this loss, that we're coming together because we have this very unique experience. I want to tell you about an amazing one that just happened to me.
Please.
This woman in New Hampshire, uh, she found out about Donna's Law, and my mom's name was Donna Nathan. And
Hmm.
this woman, Donna, in New Hampshire, she just lost her son Nathan to a gun suicide, and she was felt very connected to my mom and to this legislation, and she brought that forward in New Hampshire in the last couple months, and it didn't move through committee, but it doesn't mean it won't last next year or something.
Hmm.
But it's amazing, like these people, like how many like moms have come into my life, and how many Donnas I know. Like I know so many Donnas now
I'm
that have
sure.
been attracted to this
Yeah.
work. And so the people who are most passionate seem to find it, as long as they can hear my voice and they can see that there's momentum, and that it's not depressing work at all. It's actually amazing and super empowering. And I'm not going to say it's healing at all, because I used to think it was, but now I don't. I think it just keeps. I think it's very hard, like to deal emotionally with, let's say, like the opposition in this, and what the NRA brings,
Hmm.
to me about it can be very, I'd say, detrimental to one's mental health. Um, but having that community when something like gun violence happens to you, and you don't like you don't really even know how to behave anymore in your normal world, and it's such a relief to just be around people who know exactly what happened, who are understanding that they're not like occupied with a bunch of myths about
Hmm.
suicide,
Hmm.
or like it's really hard for people to even like know what to say around suicide, because there's all these ideas that, well, first off, we're going to say the wrong thing and then someone's going to do it, or we're going to talk about it and then someone's
Right.
going to do it, or we're going to say committed suicide but they really just died by suicide, and all these barriers in the language make it really tough for people to talk about it because they're scared to mess it up.
Yeah.
And I guess like I've taken a very direct approach to the wording, and I prefer to say that my mom shot herself.
Hmm.
I think that like one thing that I've learned a lot about is the police since my mom
Hmm.
died, and the coroner, and about how when someone dies by suicide, it's criminalized. And so your person is now essentially a murderer in the eyes of the police, and they're being investigated, and all their possessions are now property of the police.
Hmm.
And there isn't necessarily like a clear cut way to get your things back because it never goes to trial. There's no like end to the
Interesting.
case. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it got closed. Yeah, it got, declared a suicide. But then where are all these possessions? And um, one of the things that I've been really passionate about in my own family and in my vocalizing my upsettedness is the way that families do not receive suicide notes all the time.
Hmm.
And so I had to go to court twice to get two court orders to get the suicide note from my mom.
Hmm.
And all my mom's suicide note says is, Pat, I'm sorry, I love you. And it's for her boyfriend, Pat. And
Hmm.
there's clearly nothing there that would be detrimental to Pat's mental health. And
Right.
the it took it took like moving mountains governmentally for me to get this note back. I was told by
Really?
the coroner's office I would never get it back. That's what they told me.
Wow.
I had the mayor help me. I had the city council. I had social media campaign. I was, I'm talking about it right now. I just kept
Yeah.
talking about it. Um, and it is such a cruelty that is being put upon these families. And I think that because there's so much stigma around suicide, I mean, how many years is a family going to go knock on the coroner's door begging for a suicide note, or go in front of the courts, or hire a lawyer, or things like that? And
Well, it's
I mean,
insane that
actually,
you can't even have your, I mean, just the fact that you can't even access your mother's things or the suicide note, because that talk about taking somebody who's already dealing with loss and trauma and dragging them over the coals.
yeah, yeah,
You know.
it's ridiculous. And I was able to get her gun back, but I wasn't able to get her suicide note for 5 years. And I just don't really believe it has to do with evidence because, like, for example, they gave us back the bullets and the gun and her phone, which had, to me, all the evidence in it, and then
Hmm.
they saved this note. And I understand why they took the gun, because they have to. And then she did have some other possessions that essentially were incinerated because I couldn't get through the court system fast enough to receive them.
Hmm.
They don't really like matter so much to me, but let's say like her wallet and her purse. And
Sure.
I had actually sewn her purse for her. It was a purse I gave her. So, I mean, it's just like these added cruelties that you don't realize happen to families of suicide, because suicide is a crime. And when we say the word suicide, and we'll keep saying it, it's okay, you
Hmm.
know, but it is a crime. Like, it's like saying homicide, and it makes my mom a criminal, and it does stigmatize it. Like,
Hmm.
if you think about words having power, like if you think about the word adultery, let's
Hmm.
say. So like adultery is like a sin, but the word affair, that's very different, or like something that puts it into a different realm of wording.
So
And
semantics
so,
matter, like you said. Even the term committed suicide,
yeah.
like you committed a crime, right?
Yeah. And I think that it's like, I think it's kind of weird that they took out the word committed, but they didn't take out the word suicide, because it's really like a phrase.
Hmm.
And I think that if we just said, and I hope people, when they talk about me, will just use this phrase, that her mom shot herself. Because when we say things like committed suicide, what does that even mean? Like, what even happened,
Right.
And the truth is that my mom died by gun violence.
Hmm.
And gun violence has been separated from suicide for so long, and that's been part of why there hasn't been a lot of action to protect people. And in the last 5 years, we've only begun to publicly discuss how guns and suicide are connected, because we've been beholden to certain manuals that say that we shouldn't discuss lethal means at all, and so I think that when we think about how we use words and how we protect people from certain phrasings and how honest we are about a public health crisis and things like that. I think it's really important to be a little raw. And like when I think about like triggering people, like I think it's so weird that I can watch people being blown up on the news, but just discussing this requires a trigger warning. And like, for example, like I really can't like discuss it on most social medias. Like if I if I were to post this on my social media and say that we were discussing suicide prevention, Facebook will show it to 0 people because it
Oh
used
yeah,
to
I'm sure this will
suicide.
fall flat on social media. I'm sure
Yeah,
there's a
and then
streams being streamed, with the title.
yeah, it's really difficult
Yeah.
when we're talking about such a huge public health crisis
Mhm.
that we don't know we don't know what words to use. We're not allowed to use the words we do. If we do slip them in, then they're gonna shadow ban us.
Mhm.
So it's very difficult, and I hope that by talking about it and more people talking about it and the conversation opening up, that we can really make some changes.
Well, absolutely, 100%. And I think you've picked a very, probably one of the toughest fights. Do you ever get any kind of threats or anything from NRA? Not necessarily NRA, but from
Um,
maybe the others, other
I'm
side of the
really
spectrum.
careful. I've
Yeah.
been involved with activism for even before this. And actually before this activism, my first activism was around the Mardi Gras bead. And I was in the parade industry, and I was starting to notice there was like a toxicity and a smell from the Mardi Gras beads that seemed toxic.
Mhm.
And so I worked with some scientists to get them tested, and it turned out that the beads were toxic and that they
Oh
had lead
wow.
levels of over 29,000 parts per million, which for a children's product is totally illegal and dangerous. And so my first like real activism work was trying to get Mardi Gras to let go of the Mardi Gras bead.
Yeah.
And like, talk about dead hands. Like
Mhm.
I mean, I actually got more threats doing that work than I do doing
No
this
kidding.
work.
Wow.
And I joke in the Mardi Gras industry that I've moved on to something easier, like guns. But it taught me a lot. It taught me about tradition, and that nothing is more important than tradition. And there is no part of our logic that will outpower tradition. And
Mhm.
no matter how short that tradition is, for example, with the Mardi Gras beads, it's only like a couple decades old, but it's perceived as the tradition. And so being very careful not to smash on someone's tradition while having the discussions. I think also like I'm not taking away their beads,
Right, right.
Yeah, it was more voluntary. I think people, like when we think about like the government coming to take your guns, if you use that sentence and you end it with any word, it's upsetting. Like if I say
Sure.
the
Yeah.
government's coming to take your remote control, you'd be like, no, this isn't fair.
Right, right.
So yeah, I tread lightly. I'm very careful about like my lifestyle. I'm very careful about my loved ones, and I'm very secret about them. I'm very
Mhm.
secret about my whereabouts and things like that. I live with a fake name. My name actually isn't Katrina Brees, but I've been Katrina Brees for about 20 years now,
Yeah, that's smart.
and
Yeah.
um, and that has to do with previous activisms that I was doing, and like
Mhm.
learning to be a little careful about who you could upset out there and what they might do.
Mhm.
And um, regarding the NRA, I think that Americans are really scared of the NRA. And if you actually like look them up, like if you look up like, okay, who are my regional NRA representatives? And you look at their photos, it's not that intimidating. They're not like paramilitary, preppers or
Yeah.
something like that. Like they're they're like normal people dressed in office clothes and with a lot of education, typically in like political science or marketing or something like
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
And that world is really civilized. It's impressive how civilized all these people can get together, like let's say like in Congress, and work together as well as they do.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I also do other work with legislation where I kind of get to be the NRA.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my passions is women's equality, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm very passionate about decriminalizing female toplessness. Right
Mm-hmm.
now, women can get up to 10 years in prison in some states for being topless.
Wow.
And where you have men that are topless, dogs that are topless, art that's topless. And so it's called equality. And
Right. Nice pun.
and so that has really given me this other angle where, okay, in the equality world, like I'm a freedom fighter and I'm like cold hands and being on that other side that the NRA gets to play when we're discussing guns. So it's taught me how to act like them
Right.
and at least like have some um, different legislations that I'm working on, because I think they really help me get better at each one. Like when I'm writing letters to senators about one thing, it's teaching me a lot. And also once in a while, I feel like I can mention the other one to a senator, like maybe in Massachusetts or something.
Right.
um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I really love doing the legislation work. It's there's a lot of really cool people, a lot of educated people, a lot of people in healthcare too. A lot of the people that we've been working with as legislators that are supporting Donna's Law have been people who have come up through mental health and
Mm-hmm.
understand suicide prevention. That's typically who's supporting us, is someone within a state legislature that is really working for suicide prevention.
Well, you're doing wonderful work, and I know it's trying, and I'm sure triggering, at least in the initial phases
Mhm.
for you, just with everything you've been through with your mom and the cause, and having to retell the story over and over. And I know it's become kind of your marching call, but I'm sure it wasn't easy, especially in the beginning. So I appreciate the
Yeah.
work you're doing
Thank
and fighting the
you.
good fight. I'm wondering if one wants to sign up for Donna's Law in the states that is already passed, how
Sure.
how
If
do
you
they go
go
about
on the
that?
menu there, if you go, I think to more, and
Hmm.
then you can, or self-register to the left there.
Right there, self-register.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then the links are there where they can register in those 3 states. And then I also want to mention, if anyone wants to help bring this to their state, I'd love
Hmm.
your help.
That was my next
You
question.
can,
How do we advocate?
yeah. So if you want to contact me through any interaction with that website, will go straight to me, and no one else will see it unless I forward it.
Oh, okay.
So please like fill it out. And then what I will be doing is when we get to your state, we might have you, like, let's say, like request a meeting with your legislator that our team can sit in on and help support that legislator in doing the work. Most of what we're doing right now is just offering support to the legislators and saying like, hey, we see you doing this. We see that you sponsored this. Let us help you with bringing in endorsements like NAMI and AFSP and chapter leaders like that. So
Hmm.
once we can kind of get a footing in a state, then we can build that up and create a really strong case for the legislator and hopefully pass it. And sometimes it takes a little while, but it seems like it's moving in the right direction.
Well, how wonderful! And I know it's a long game for sure,
Hmm.
but I think it's definitely we're moving in the right direction with that. Like you said, with all of the tragedies we've been seeing and the statistics that have been coming out on suicide and the means and points of intervention, this is right on point. So thank you so much for the work you're doing, Katrina. It's much appreciated. It's much needed. You're always welcome back on to share the progress, how it's going, other states are added, and so forth. So feel free.
Cool. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And it doesn't look like we have any questions in the comments just yet. But if anybody has any more questions, if it's okay, they can drop them in the comments on the replay. And I can always shoot those over to
Great.
you. All right. Thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege. Any last nuggets you want to drop? Any other resources you want to provide, or are we good?
Sure. So sometimes people ask me like other ways that to prevent suicide,
Please.
and
Yeah.
and here's one that I think doesn't get said enough.
Sure.
Um, Suicide is often very episodic. It's very
Mm-hmm.
much involved with a specific mood, and our moods can change. And one of the ways that our moods can change is because we get hungry. And
Mm-hmm.
I get calls often from people who are suicidal, and I have found that if we can just get them hungry, if we can just like get them to think about something else, you know, one of the games my mom and I used to play when she would be really down was we would think of all the kinds of pie that we could think of, and we would just like say all the
I love it.
pies, until she would get hungry and move that mood, into something else. And so there is a lot of hope. Suicide is very often episodic. These
Mm-hmm.
small moments can make all the difference, and they can pass very quickly, and maybe with no issues. So I hope more people can pass through these moods safer.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm a 5150 designee, and so when I'm doing a risk assessment with someone, do we send them to the hospital or do we not? A lot of it, those are some of the first questions we ask. Have you been eating? Have you been
Hmm.
drinking? And if not, we always have water and snacks on hand. And you'll be amazed at how that can calm somebody down because if, like you said, if somebody's in a very sensitive mental state, if they're very stressed out or they're having an episode, very agitated, a lot of the times people forget to take care of themselves, especially when we're looking at
Hmm.
depression, right? Hygiene, what are the first things to go? Hygiene, self-care, first things to go, right?
Hmm.
And so if we can just kind of get back to some of those basic needs, it helps the body self-regulate,
Hmm.
right? And then what you're talking about with the pies, that's mental grounding, that's mindfulness. We use a lot of that
Hmm.
too. Count the chairs in the room, name your favorite holidays, what are your favorite sports. We're getting the mind on a different track, literally. And so
Hmm.
thank you for sharing that. These are some very valid skills, and I think
Thank you.
yes, it's important to talk about, the high level. How do we, prevent suicides, gun suicides, laws, legislation, things like that. But then in the trenches, very practical levels, how do we
Hmm.
how do we help each other in the trenches,
Hmm.
right? So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. Absolutely. Well, Katrina, I really appreciate you being on. Hope you have a great, fantastic week, and that your mission continues, and more
Thank
states get
you.
on board. So, all right.
Thanks so much.
My pleasure. And like I said, you're always welcome back on if you want to share how things are going.
Great.
All right. You take care.
Bye.
Bye.